In this training, we are going to take a look at the users and employee settings of FTx POS. When you log in as an administrator, you will see tabs for users and user roles. You are given one administrator login by default. An additional one can be added for an additional fee if needed. A user is defined as somebody such as a corporate payroll manager, inventory administrator, or marketing coordinator. They cannot log into the point of sale and are generally reserved for back office roles exclusively. Each user can be assigned permissions based on their role. These are called user roles. This helps simplify managing positions by doing so at a group level rather than individually. If we press Add New and give it a name, on the right here, we can allow all permissions to be used, or we can specify individual ones for each user. For example, on the POS dropdown, there is Reports. Let's say this user also needs to be able to look at discounts and maybe buy downs. After configuring all these permissions using these boxes, you can click Save and then filter over back to the user. At the top, we have Account Role, and after we save that user role we just created, it can be assigned from the dropdown. The next tab, Employees, is one of the most important in Control Center. This is where we go to view, edit, add, delete, and configure all of the employees for our business. On a side note, in this section, when we have an employee who does not work for us anymore, or in any other situation that would require an employee to be removed, it's best to mark them as inactive rather than deleting their information entirely. This is a good practice throughout Control Center in regards to departments, employees, tags, etc., as in the event that the information would need to be restored, it's easier to have it on file. If we click Add New on the top right of the Create Employee page, it has 4 tabs: Details, Contact, Permissions, and Notes. Details are the employee's basic information. Anything with an asterisk next to it is required for each employee. The next tab is Contact Information. None of this is required in order to save. However, if there is any additional information not covered in Basic Information, it can be placed here. Most importantly is the Permissions tab. The Choose Group dropdown utilizes the Employee Groups tab. Employee groups are basically a bucket of permissions that you can assign employees to without having to individually edit each employee's permissions. An example of this would be different employee groups such as a manager group, a cashier group, a stocker group, etc. For each of those employee groups, specific permissions are given. For example, the manager group might have more access than, say, the cashier group. Whenever an employee is created, instead of manually attempting to find out what the employee will have access to, it can be done in Employee Groups by selecting Employee Groups from this dropdown. This is a very time-saving feature when adding new employees. Next is the Is Manager button. If an employee is a manager, we'll check this to Yes. And what this does is allow this person access to specific settings related to manager duties. For example, on the POS, almost every single button can be locked behind a manager required setting. This creates a pop-up when certain actions are performed on the POS. At that point, an employee who is set up to be a manager can log in and override the requirement on the POS. Underneath that, we have 3 other tabs. We have Dashboard Settings, POS Settings, and Handheld Settings. These are going to be permissions for the different areas that the employee will be able to log into. Dashboard is going to be the Control Center. Every employee, if you set them up to have permissions, can log into the Control Center. They will not have the same privileges as an administrative login, but you can configure them to have higher elevations of permission than normal if you wanted to. From here, we click the green Modify Dashboard Group Settings button, which gives a list of permissions. You can scroll through here and check and uncheck what you want this employee to have access to, and once you have configured those settings to your liking, you can click Save. Down here we have Location Assignment. This is where we assign the employee to a store. This allows more diverse employee and store assignments for specific roles. Whenever creating employees, you must be there to assign them to a location. Even if we modify all their permissions, if we do not assign them to a location, they will not be able to log in. POS settings is for any setting involving register permissions. Handheld settings are permissions for the handheld, and what an employee must be able to do on the handheld. The same thing is across all three tabs. We must assign them to a location before saving, otherwise they will not be able to log in. Notes are self-explanatory, such as if you have any specific notes for this employee, such as disciplinary actions or special accommodations needed. Employee groups, as mentioned, is where we're able to create buckets of permissions to drop employees into. Depending on how many groups we want, we can set up the permissions for each group one time. And as long as you are confident in the permissions that you've assigned to this group, instead of going through and individually doing it for each employee, you just assign them to a group. For example, if you don't want your cashiers to log into the control center, you can go through to the dashboard settings and you can uncheck everything. This concludes the training on users and employees.